Auzubillahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. As-salatu was-salamu ala sayyidina nabiyyina khatimul mursaleen Abul Qasim Muhammad salawat. Sayyidina Muhammad wa alayhi wa ala baytihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin al-masumin al-mazlumin. Innama yuridu Allahu liyuzhiba عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد أما بعد قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم إن الحسين مصباح الهدى وسفينة النجاة بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا أوفوا بالعقود صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. So the ayat that I just recited is from Surah Al-Ma'idah. It's Surah number 5 in the Quran. It talks about food, halal food and haram food and so on. But it starts with this ayat. And the translation is, O you who believe, fulfill your promises. So inshallah the topic of my talk today is the importance of keeping promises. And so in the next few minutes I'm going to tell you how important it is in our faith that we keep our promises. And so when I speak at majlises, my goal is that you take back something from the majlis as tabarruk. And so inshallah, when I'm done with my speech, we have all heard the saying, people say, promises are meant to be broken, right? So my goal is when we are done today, you're going to say promises are meant to be kept, and promises are promises. So that's my goal. So in the Holy Quran, that's the one example that I gave you is from Surah Al-Ma'idah. I read that ayat. But there's several instances in the Quran where Allah talks about the importance of keeping promises. For example, this is an ayat from Surah Bani Israel. It's Surah number 17. It's verse number 34, where Allah says, fulfill your promises. Every promise will be questioned about. And then in Surah Al-Saf, it's Surah number 61. It's verse 2 and 3. Allah says, O you who believe, why do you say that which you don't do? It is most hateful to Allah that you should say that which you do not do. And so this is where the ayat ends. And so Allah is telling us that the most hateful thing to Allah is that we say things that we are not serious about, or we say things that we don't fulfill those words. And then there's lots of hadiths by our imams, by the Prophet. The Prophet says that the sign of a hypocrite is 3. So if you see these 3 things in a person, that person is not a believer, that person is a hypocrite. And those 3 things are somebody who lies, somebody who doesn't fulfill their trust, and somebody who does not keep their promises. So those 3 things are the things that differentiates a believer from a hypocrite. And then there is hadiths by our first imam, our Mawla, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, Sallallahu Muhammad wa alayhi Muhammad. Our Mawla says, this is a letter to Malik al-Ashtar, which is a famous letter that was adopted by the UN Council when they recommended to the Arab nations what they should do. And so our Mawla says in this letter that even if you have kept a promise, if you have given your word to a non-believer, you have to still fulfill that promise. So this is the lofty values that our leadership has. Our Mawla, these are his values, and we are the Shias of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So we have to fulfill our promises and our contracts. So inshallah, what I'm going to do now is talk about the different kinds of promises. And then I'm going to give you an example from Islamic history about a promise that was kept. And then inshallah, I'll end my majlis. So as far as promises, there are 4 kinds of promises. Promises that we have with Allah, promises that Allah has with us, promises that we make to ourselves, within ourselves, and promises we make to ourselves. So those are the 4 kinds that I'm going to talk about. So let's take the first one. Promises that Allah has for us. Allah has said in the Holy Quran that Allah has promised us Jannat. If we are on the straight path, if we do good deeds, then we are promised Jannat by Allah. And then Allah says that He promises us that He is going to listen to our du'as. So if we do a dua with the best intention and with sincerity, then Allah is promising us that He is going to listen to the duas. And then finally Allah says in the Holy Quran that He is going to bring peace and justice to this world. And He's going to bring us back our 12th Imam, inshallah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And then the promises that we make with Allah. These are the mannats that we do. For example, if somebody doesn't have a job, we say, Alamya, if you give us a job, then we are going to pay so much money in charity. Or it could be somebody who is sick, and we say, inshallah, if they get better, then we are going to give in charity and so on. Or the best thing to do, which is also the sunnah of our Bibi Fatima Zahra, is that we fast. That's the best mannat that we can do, is fasting. If somebody is sick, and you do a mannat that, inshallah, if they get better, this is what I'm going to do, then it's a recommendation that we say we are going to fast for 3 days. That's what our Bibi did. When Imam Hassan and Imam Hussain were sick one time, this is what she did. So that's something that we follow when we do a mannat for somebody who's sick and we want them to get better. But those contracts that we have with Allah, those are firm contracts. And Allah says that if you fulfill your promises with me, I will fulfill my promises with you. That's said in several places in the Quran. So there's a story about a person, this is during the early days of Islam, and he was not a Muslim at that point. He went to the Prophet and he said, "Oh, Prophet of Islam, I'm very poor, and please pray that I become rich." And so our Prophet said that if Allah grants you bounties, then you're going to be questioned for those bounties. It's better that you remain poor than you are rich, and then you cannot answer to Allah about what you did with the bounties that Allah gave you. So the person went back, but then he came back to the Prophet, and he said, "Oh, Prophet of Allah, can you please pray for me that I get lots of money, because I promise that I'm going to give a lot of money in charity for zakat and so on, and I promise that I'm going to give away a lot of my money. I'm not going to keep a lot of money for myself, but I'm going to just distribute the money." And so the Prophet said, "Okay, I'm going to do that." And he raised his hands up and he prayed for this person. And sure enough, it's a Prophet's prayer. So the person became really, really rich. And in the meantime, he also converted to Islam. But then he wasn't giving any of his money away. And he wasn't doing his namazes because he was so busy. It was, the business, of course, was, like raising cattle. So he had a lot of goats and sheep and camels. And he would spend the time grazing his cattle, taking care of, all of that business and so on. So he hardly had any time to do his namaz. But then the verse in the Quran was revealed about paying zakat. It was obligatory on Muslims to pay zakat. So the Prophet, as a reminder to this person, he sent his followers to this person and he said, "Go to this man and tell him that now it's obligatory to pay zakat. It's not, something that you may or may not do. It's part of your religion. It's part of your faith. So go to him and tell him to pay zakat." So the followers went to this person and they said, "The Prophet wants you, it's obligatory now. You have to pay zakat." And this man said, "What is happening now? The Prophet is collecting taxes now? Tell the Prophet that I don't have any money to give for zakat because all my money is tied up in my business. I don't have anything to give. So go back and tell the Prophet." So the follower of the Prophet came back to the Prophet and he conveyed the message, and the Prophet was really sad about what had happened to this person. And so the message, now I don't know what happened to this person, like in real life, what azab came to him, I do not know, but I think it's sufficient that he made the Prophet unhappy, and that's sufficient. And so the message is that if we make a mannat with Allah, then we fulfill it. We fulfill it as fast as we possibly can. So now we come to the promises that we make among ourselves. Now I know it's including myself, if somebody says, "Please come to my birthday party," or "Please come to a function," you say, "Well, inshallah, we are going to be there." And we don't really mean to be there. So there is a beautiful hadith by our sixth Imam, Imam Jafar as-Sadiq alayhi salam. Muhammad wa ali. And I'm going to read it to you so I don't make any mistakes. Our Imam says, "A believer's promise to his believing brother is a vow that has no expiation. But one who goes back on his word has declared his opposition to Allah and enmity to the apostle. So our sixth Imam is saying that if you have made a promise to a fellow believer, then it's a vow. And by expiation, it means that it's kafara. Like sometimes when you intentionally miss, we don't do that, but intentionally, let's say we miss a roza in Ramadan, or we break our fast in Ramadan, not miss, but break our fast, right? Intentionally, then we have to do kafara. We have to pay a certain amount of money, and we have to keep a certain amount of fast and so on. So our sixth Imam is saying that if you break a promise with a fellow believer, there is not even a kafara for it where you can, like have your sin erased. You can't even do anything about it. So we have to be really careful when we give a word to somebody, and that also includes like the time, like we say, okay, we are going to be there at 9 o'clock, well, we better be there at 9 o'clock. Sometimes, like Allah is merciful and kind, and Allah is a forgiver of sins. Sometimes it is possible that, it's out of our control and we cannot make it, which is fine, but intentionally breaking a promise is a really bad sin in our faith. So there's another part that I want to talk about, and that is the promise that we make our kids, right? So there's a lot of moms here, and if the kid is crying, we might say, well, we are going to give you a piece of candy when we go back home, or we will take you to the zoo, or whatever it is. The Prophet says about children, he says, be loving and kind to your children, and if you make a promise with them, then fulfill it. So that's a hadith by the Prophet. So we have to be careful what we tell our kids as well. So now we come to the final part, the fourth kind of promise, and that's the promise we make to ourselves. And that's also really, really important because it's a pact with Allah again. Now, when we were young, right, when we were younger, we all had a lot of dreams, right? We wanted to write a book maybe, we wanted to get a PhD or master's, or we had so many goals and dreams, right? And there's nothing stopping us if we make a promise to ourselves that we are going to achieve that. And so, because it is really a pact with Allah that we have made, and Allah is the one who's going to help us achieve those dreams and those promises. So if you come to my house in Chicago, I have a piece of paper where I have written down my promises that I have made to Allah, and it hangs on the wall, and my whole family can read those promises, and they hold me accountable for those promises. So it's something that is also really important in our faith. And how do you come up with those promises, first of all? It is by a process of self-reflection, which is really important in our faith. There's a hadith by a prophet who says that 1 hour of contemplation is equal to a year of worship. 1 hour of contemplation. And that's something that nobody talks about. We hear about meditation, we hear about transcendental meditation and how good it is, right? All of these different faith and cultures, they have meditation. But this is meditation, this is contemplation, which is part of our faith, which is stressed by our Aima. Our Imams used to do that, our Prophet used to do contemplation and self-reflection. And there's so many hadiths, and inshallah, like on the 6th of Muharram, there's a majlis at my house. I invite all of you to come. It's at 7:30. And I'm going to talk about self-reflection in our faith, contemplation in our faith, and what it means, and how it's different from meditation. So inshallah, I invite all of you to be there, and we'll talk about that. But that's also important that we have our dreams, we have our goals written down, and we have identified those goals. And we have, and Allah is going to inshallah help us achieve those goals. Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So let's go on and talk about an example in Islamic history about a promise that was made. So initially in the early days of Islam, the Prophet was commanded by Allah to convey the message of Islam to his relatives at an event called Dawat-e-Zul Ashira. So at that event, the Prophet, after conveying his message to everybody, he stood up and he said, whoever is going to help me in my mission is going to be my successor. So that was the promise made by the Prophet. And nobody got up except for our Mawla, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, Saleh, Muhammad wa Ali. Our Mawla got up and he said, I will be your helper, and I will protect you, and I'll protect Islam. And so that was a promise, 2 promises that were made. A promise made by the Prophet and a promise made by our Imam. And where those promises kept? The promises were kept by both the Prophet and our Imam, because the mission of Islam